again for the third time this afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to the second Visionary Circle of the year. I'm Marie van Wyk, for those of you who don't know me, because I see quite a few new people in the room today. And it's my privilege today to welcome Prof. Sean Patrick and Dr. Yvette Hlophe from the University of Pretoria, both of them of the Faculty of Health Sciences. Sean is speaking on the topic of enhancing public health education through smart learning environments, and he is an associate professor in health measurement sciences at the university and a researcher with the Environmental Chemical Pollution and Health Research Unit. Yvette will engage us on enhancing critical thinking assessment in medical education, and she is a senior lecturer in the Department of Physiology at the School of Medicine at the University of Pretoria. She leads a specialized research group focused on cancer therapeutics, and in addition, she's investigating the therapeutic potential of phytochemicals such as EGCG, gingerzone, and curcumin. Now you're having me here, Yvette, with all these names, which offer promising low toxicity, cost-effective and accessible solutions for cancer treatment. Yvette also served as a member of the medical design team tasked with the revision of the medical curriculum to meet the Health Professionals Council of South Africa standards from 2022 to 24. Sean, I'm going to give over to you. I assume you are going first. And then I don't think if you are going to ask questions throughout your presentation, but if you don't, we can allow it at the end or at the end of the session. So let's see how you want to manage the session. Okay, over to you, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just one question. Do you want me to share my talk from my side?
Yes, please. Yes,
yeah,
will you please share?
Hold on for me.
Now we can see your screen.
We're in presenter mode, just hold on.
Romanda, okay. Is it on presenter mode? Yeah, it looks like.
Okay, presenter mode.
Yes,
okay.
It looks like.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
We see the slideshow. We don't see the presenter mode.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, let me try again. Apologies. Actually, I'm just going to share my entire screen. It's going to be easier.
Yeah, that's easier.
Okay. Better now?
Yes, now we can.
Great. All right. First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for the opportunity to talk about some of the work we've been doing, particularly focusing on advancing public health education through smart learning environments. And I'll particularly talk about the conceptual thinking around what a smart learning environment is defined as, how do we integrate technology, and we think about curriculum development in public health in particular, how do we incorporate that? So what I'll present for now is a paper that we wrote early in the year, and it's been accepted for publication. And the purpose really was to define a smart learning environment and to conceptually think how we can build on the lessons we've learned, particularly in terms of keeping students engaged, but also ensuring that students can self-regulate their learning. So how do we actually go about doing that? So what I'll talk about, give a very brief introduction, share with you the aim of the paper. Very briefly, we'll talk about some of the theoretical perspectives. We'll share what smart learning environments, and then from the postgraduate diploma in public health, I'll give us a few examples of how we are moving towards building these learning environments. And if you think of a smart learning environment or an online environment, it really becomes this community of inquiry where students are able to engage with the content, but also they need to be able to self-regulate their learning, because in an online environment, everything would then be self-paced. So using the examples and thinking, how do all of these parts and the theories fit together, trying to propose a conceptual framework for a smart learning environment in public health. And I'll touch on a couple of the knowledge gaps and the future research, excuse me, which will then lead into the next presentation. So if throughout the presentation, if anything is unclear, please stop me at that point in time. I don't mind answering questions throughout the presentation. So um, as far as public health is concerned, we are being tasked to build to build a future public health workforce. And if we think about in health particularly, the landscape is starting to evolve. We have changes in technology, disease patterns are shifting. We're thinking about healthcare delivery, and we're thinking about what are these skills for tomorrow's healthcare workforce. And it is yes to be able to be fluent in the digital environment, be able to use some of these skills in terms of in an online environment, but also we need to encourage this continuous learning. And when we are building this workforce through the teaching that we're doing, we need to think about how we integrate this development with future needs, how we think about strengthening partnerships with academia and health services. But for the focus of this talk, particularly looking at innovative education and training models. How do we enable the next generation or the next generation workforce to be able to learn all of these skills and apply it and be able to be relevant not only now, but as well as in the future? So that will be the focus of the talk. So if you think of an online learning environment, online programs are generally associated with various factors, but to be persistent in an online environment, students are often encouraged to be self-regulate their learning, so able to pace themselves, be able to self-direct their learning, to understand when they are, maybe when the feedback is provided, they'll be able to reflect on that, and then from there be able to determine for themselves where are the areas they need to improve and to be efficient in the environment. So able to use the tools, and the tools need to be user friendly, that they can engage with the content online. And these are the perceived or the value of the learning activities as the modules are being built to ensure that students actually complete the courses and the modules they are doing in an online environment. And this is becoming particularly important because if you're thinking of training next generation, in order to reach wide or to reach larger have a larger reach, it's becoming more important to also include an online learning uh, courses. So the purpose of the smart learning environment and thinking around it was, how do we propose this conceptual frame for creating this environment that not only incorporates meaningful online learning opportunities, but that these should also be in line with expected competencies for these public health professionals as per the mandate to train the next generation workforce. And if these students who are actively engaged in these online modules, they need to be presented with self-regulated learning opportunities in order to enhance their knowledge retention as well as be able to apply it. So the activities should be able to allow them to apply this in this smart learning environment. So by definition, a smart learning environment is one where it adapts learning content. So as the student progresses the learning content, we would need to change the student's needs. There should also be recommendation of tools and strategies. And we do have that built in some of the modules that we have, where in order for students to maybe to refresh their memory, we can build in a tool to allow them out with flashcards, for example. So the learning environment can be adapted to do that. These environments should also be able to sync with all computing devices, and that's often been a bit problematic where some of these platforms we're using are not always compatible on mobile devices, for example. So when thinking about creating this environment, technology does play a huge role, and we need to ensure that students are able to access that, but also to reflect what's happening in the real world, to be able to apply what they've learned into this environment. So that's by definition a smart learning environment. So if we take the online modules that we have, how do we build them or advance them to become these smart learning environments. So while doing this, we do realize that in online learning, there are some of the challenges. And some of the activities that we do develop may lack that face-to-face interaction. So the traditional social dynamics you have in a class is not always there. So you have to think of how do you build this community of inquiry online, where instead of in a class where students have this collaborative learning and peer support, where you recreate that in an online environment. So what kind of activity should be in that environment? If students need more guidance or individual assistance, it's always a bit of a problem, because if you think of the feedback, the turnaround time on the feedback can be quite long if it has to be individualized. So how in this environment can we improve on these? Learning online does require self-discipline and self-motivation and time management skills. But if you build your environment in such a way where students are able to work through the content, be prompted regularly, but also have activities that are scaffolded that would allow them to slowly but surely learn the content, and then over time be able to manage their time as well as to improve the academic the performance. So inherently, there are some opportunities that we have identified. And on the next couple of slides, I'll show you some of the activities that we have thought about to take it from just an online learning module or a degree to really building a learning environment that would enable students to have this sense of community, to be able to have instructional strategies that were like problem solving, for example, allow students to really think outside the box to apply their learning. One issue we always have is with regular and timely feedback, and Yvette will talk a bit about that and thinking in this online environment how we can improve on that, because that has always been a bit of a concern. But also, in order to address individual needs and concerns, to tailor some of the assessments to different learning styles that students might have. And very often we don't have that in all on-learning environments, but if we're thinking of the smart learning environment, how do we think about doing that? So if we look at, I want to talk about two theories and how we incorporated this. One is, let's start with self-regulated learning, where students they would set a goal. They would then look at the instructions, focus on the tasks, and afterwards they were able to evaluate themselves. That's the cycle of self-regulated learning. So if you're thinking out in terms of activities in these environments, how do you go about doing that as students are able to regulate their learning, but also keeping in mind the theory of multiple intelligences, where students have different sets of skills and the activities should really align to some of these intelligences. So how do you merge these two theoretical perspectives in an online environment, creating these activities and tasks and providing feedback that will allow the student to have this learning environment that would encourage them to learn? So one way of doing that and looking at building a community and a social presence, this started in 2022. And instead of having the assignment presented in a Word format, rather presented in a format of a video, and the students' responses have been video format too. And throughout, this was run over 3 weeks. And in that 3 weeks, we had about 2,000 responses. There was about 22,000 views. And in total, the discussion time was about 755 uh, 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 hours that students had that were able to discuss. So you created that online presence and you got students to interact in ways that you could not really do that in class. And after the 3 weeks, what this activity really did is not only foster a online social presence, but also allow students to listen to the other speakers using the terminology in the module too. So that's one way of having the environment adapt, where as weeks go on, students, you could hear as they were talking about the module, they became more confident in the language, and they were then once they were more confident, they were then able to do the tasks and the activities. because we know that some students are not necessarily, they might not want to speak, they're more creative. Thinking of in this environment itself to create tasks, and this was a cartoon that we had created, and taking the same content, but having it in group work, but having a more creative side to it too, where students could not only on the lowest, on the low Bloom's taxonomy, but on the high, on the higher level where they would need to create their own cartoon that would depict the real life problem. And in this case, this particular example, we used the pandemic, and it's about vaccination, about pro-vaccine, and about anti-vaccine. And it was great to have students in this environment be able to think about how would this play out in a real world scenario, but creating it in a way that is creative and will allow students to share with one another their thoughts and their ideas, still having it's a problem solving activity, but still having peer collaboration. And students would then lead these discussions in their own groups about their own thinking and their own worldviews about how, in this case, vaccination should potentially work. So it was a great way of fostering that in the smart learning environment. And then lastly, in order for to keeping students engaged, there is a big move to have more like your escape rooms and the game-based approach. So thinking about incorporating game-based approaches in smart learning environments, we looked at thinking how could we, as far as research methodology is concerned, incorporate that within a module. And we used the story of James Bond, where it's a familiar character. But looking at in public health, he's exposed to infectious diseases, for example, and we created an escape room where it was this cohesive and immersive experience where students could really get to see the scene, what he was doing, how they relate that to what they have learned. And while they are in the escape room, it was an individual player format at that point in time, how they could work through it and be able to apply what they have learned. And then throughout the game, how we built it was there were some limited choices that they could make that was informed by what they have learned. So they could easily take what they have learned, they could apply that within this environment, where the assignment or the assessment is not really just a written assignment, but it really thinks about how do we make some of these decisions in reality. And we also link that to publications on some of these answers, where students could actually see in this environment, this is what it would really look like. So we're really making this a very creative and interactive environment. So just very briefly, this is how the scene is sketched out, where students would log in, enter their name, they would get an assignment for that week, and they would then go through all of the clues. And this was a qualitative research example where if the answer was incorrect, the feedback would be immediate. And that's the one thing about a smart learning environment where there's continual feedback. So students could learn from their mistake. They could then go back again. They could refresh their memory. If they were still unsure, it would be linked to an article that would explain the detail in a bit more detail, and they would then be able to work through the game. Just some of the feedback we received, just on that one particular thing, was that these questions were easy to answer. It linked back to the purpose of the module. Having the examples we shared in all the 7 weeks culminate into one sort of a activity in the end really helped. And one of the students said that it gave an opportunity to test the knowledge from all the concepts they learned throughout the week, and was an interesting way to go back and to look at all the previous weeks and to put everything together. So really to advocate for not just an online module, but really having it be a creative and a smart learning environment. So if we think about how do we now conceptually put all of this together? In class, you could easily create a community of inquiry, where you could have activities in class, or you could have discussions where the students would have a presence and you as the teacher would have a presence. But in an online environment, this can become a bit complicated. So one of the activities that we had, the video responses, we tried to recreate a community of inquiry where students were able to also interact with one another, but that they could also be able to to share the work that they've learned. If we then bring in the smart learning environment, self-regulated learning, we then see that the smart learning environment becomes a little bit, it's more than a community of inquiry. It now adds in the students' own ability to set their goals, to self-assess themselves, in the bond game was one example, but also then that would inform the learning strategy and for the student themselves, and as well as for the coordinator to be able to guide the students in their learning. If we then add to that personalized learning pathways in this modeling environment, we now have the data analytics and the AI, which Yvette will talk about, and how you can use that to either have a positive effect on the learner's progress, so be able to give feedback more timely, but also use it to tailor the content. And one way we did that is to have different types of activities linking to students, different intelligence that students have. So really trying to have activities that speak to all of the students. If we then look at adding to that the self-regulated support and development, where you now have these tools, you have reflections on learning, and we're building reflections in the modules, but also improving the peer interaction and the mentoring in some of the activities we have. You really then support this notion of self-regulated learning within the smart learning environment. And then lastly, by adding all of these different components together, it then allows you to facilitate this community of inquiry online. And ideally, what you would want to have is you'd want to have this active engagement, which one of the activities we showed, they were quite, the interactions on all of the videos were actually quite a lot. And in order to foster this collaboration, there's group collaboration, there's group types of projects. But one of the things that is a limitation, and those are the red blocks, what Yvette will talk about next, is while these learning environments are great and you can have all of these different activities, one issue has always been how do we incorporate the technology? Technology is starting to change quite a lot. So how do we bring in technology to assist with learner progress, reflecting on learning, real-time communication, as well as what giving feedback to students more timely. So that is one important aspect when we're thinking about creating these smart learning environments. So looking at what's coming next, we really need to think about how do we add more of a real life scenarios or context, some of the content we are using, and how we can incorporate artificial intelligence in monitoring and supporting not only student well-being, but also the progress of the students itself, themselves. And to advance this teaching and learning, to have, as discussions like we're having right now, to try and share our examples and try and really create or to create these online learning environments that foster this community where there's collaborative learning, peer interaction, and really allow students to feel like a sense of belonging online. So the paper, we talk about how we developed how the conceptual thinking around the smart learning environments has been accepted for a medical science educator. Probably be published in the next maybe couple of days. And just to acknowledge the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning grant, University of Pretoria, for the funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. Is there anybody in the audience that have a question about the smart learning, or what is experience with the students doing all of this? No questions. So Sean, then I will be the lucky winner to ask you one question.
Okay, sure. Please do.
And it's more about, because sometimes we design all of these things with
Yes.
solid foundations, built on research. But then if you look from the other side and you look at the engagement and the participation of students, it lacks. And then maybe we don't really achieve what we set out to achieve. What was your experience when you, for example, toggle between the multiple intelligence with the students? Did they really participate? Was the quality of something that's worth marking? And what was your experience on that?
That's a great question. Thank you, Marie. I think the thing here also is that especially in the last couple of years, this is the first time some students have studied a module online, any courses online. So very few of them were not quite sure what to expect. And there was the feedback in the beginning. Also, like you said, we create these activities from a theoretical point of view. And I can give you one example with the bond game. The first time that I ran that, I thought, okay, I will now. It speaks to all the multiple intelligences. Students will have different who feel more comfortable in this environment. The feedback I got, some was extremely positive. Students liked the challenges, but those were the students. And if you read their comments, it said, we like the interaction. We like that there was some type of gamification. But the students who actually prefer to have a written assignment, who need to think a bit more about it, they were not very positive about that, because now it meant thinking of things very quickly. There's no time to go back to double check my work. So my take home from that was that although we want to create perfect activities for every single student in the whole module, that is not going to be possible. What we rather need to do is think of how to balance these, and then also think about waiting, that we don't that we look at some of the activities like the bond game. That is, yes, it's a great activity, but it shouldn't count much more than some of the other ones to discourage students from doing certain activities and rather letting it go. And I do think the more we start sharing with students different types of activities and assessments we have, they will also feel a bit more comfortable going into doing an escape room. Um, because some of the learners we have are not young learners. They are maybe the advanced learner or the more mature learner who does take a longer time to navigate in the online environment. And those are some of the comments that we had. People saying this is a great and I like it, but it took me a long time to figure out how the room works. So I don't need to think again and say, okay, let me have a guide instead. So as the academics, we also learn through this whole process.
Thank you so much, Sean. Is there any other questions? No more questions? Then Yvette, it's over to you to share your screen with us and challenge us with your presentation.
I like that challenge. Yeah. Can you see my screen, Marie?
I can see your slides. You are not in presenter mode yet.
Now?
Yes.
Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone, for the second time. Let me just admit that person. Great. So like Marie said, I'm Yvette Hlophe and I'm from the physiology department. And she also mentioned that I was part of a task team that was asked to revamp or review the medical curriculum at the University of Pretoria. And in our reviewing process, we thought this is a great opportunity to just review the attributes of a day one doctor. And we thought that it's really important that a day one doctor should be a critical thinker, that they should be reflective in nature, and that they should have good communication skills. What we found very interesting is that we all would like, especially healthcare workers, that they are critical thinkers, but interesting that in our higher education system, we actually, we want them to have the skills, but we don't teach it and we don't assess it. And maybe because we don't necessarily know how to. But it is really important, especially for students who are later on required to work in such a stressful environment where they need to make a prompt decision, and to ensure that the decision is evidence-based, we need to ensure that they are critical thinkers. Another aspect that we considered is that an aspect that promotes critical thinking is that within their learning process, if we ensure that the students get a level of constructive feedback, that will also promote their level of critical thinking. And so constructive feedback is really that whether the student performs a specific skill in the clinical setting or whether it's a theoretical assessment, that there is a level of feedback that is given on time on the specific assessment, and that it's timely, and that is also individualized to a certain extent. And so when you provide this continuous constructive feedback to students, it really also builds a level of student reflection. They get to really look at this feedback and say, what do I need to improve on? It also makes them extremely aware of their competencies. So what are they really good at, and what do they need to just put in a little bit more time into? And over the years, over the medical training program, it will definitely build a level of confidence. And so this is what our team was focusing on. And so just to give a bit of background on the reflection, to let you know that there was a specific model that we used, that we showed to the students as well, the Gibbs reflection model, that we walked the students through each of the individual steps, just so that they could understand the importance of reflection as an individual, but also specifically to their specific career orientation. And so this brings us now to the tool that Sean was talking about, is that we then spoke to our collaborators at the computer science department, and we said, how can we involve the use of large language models to have a look at these reflections that the medical students were conducting, and how could we, after marking the reflections using the large language models, how could we ensure that we also provide constructive feedback to the students? And so this project was more twofold. So in the first two cohorts, we really looked at marking the reflections initially. In those days, we used Chat 3.5 as out, we used Lambda, and we used was it a third LLM, but then that was just for the reflection. In terms of the constructive feedback, at that time Chat 4 was out, and in the initial reflection 3.5 gave the best result, and therefore we then used 3.5 and 4 in terms of assessing constructive feedback. Now, why it was so important or we thought it was a good idea to use the LLMs, is because they can actually mark the large content, the reflections that the student conduct, and that you were able to prompt them. And we were able to prompt them based on the rubric that the human facilitators or the human markers, those of us who teach the medical students, would use anyway. So we prompted the LLMs based on that. Just speaking about the prompting, is that the more detailed the prompt is, the better quality of result, and you improve the reliability of the LLM's functionality. And so why we also thought this was really an important task to perform is that obviously in the clinical setting, I'm sure you're all aware, the clinicians have quite a few responsibilities, not only teaching, but also the responsibilities in the hospital setting. But even those of us who are scientists, we also have other responsibilities in the laboratory. So we thought the LLMs to assist us would really be a good way, or a good attempt to try and see if this would be possible. It was also a way to save time that we didn't have, save money, and to ensure that the students receive the constructive feedback. And so basically the pilot study, like I said, we had two main breakdown of the cohorts, but it was really to see if we could use these large language models as a tool to mark reflections and provide constructive feedback in order to assess critical thinking skills of the medical students. The medical students that we opted for, we thought this would be best assessed in their first clinical encounter. So those were third years that were entering the clinic environment for the first time. And we used our 3 clinical environment settings, which was Steve Biko, Kalafong, and Tembisa. And then, of course, we had ethical approval to do so. So how we went about in the first 2 years, we had an information session with the facilitators and the students, where we basically explained the importance of reflection, the importance of critical thinking as an individual, but also really how important these tools are, or attributes for a medical student. And so we provided also additional reading material for the students on Blackboard, which is our learning management system. And once we did that, we also explained we went through the rubric with the students just to explain to them how they would be assessed. We then asked them to upload their reflections, and we did also encourage a level of creativity because we also understand how that also helps to build critical thinking. The students had actually 3 opportunities to reflect, one prior entering the clinical setting and one in the middle and then one post that. And then we had the facilitators who then gave group feedback to the students. But once again, we then used, so those were the initial LLMs that we used in terms of these student reflections. Just to give you an indication, this is how the Blackboard setting is. The student would log on, would have a link to the rubric that they could then look at before they reflect, and then they will upload their individual reflections. And just because we also, just to speak to the questions that we asked, because it was also a learning skill for us that asking questions that are critical thinking in nature is not as easy as it seems. So we also had to improve the quality of our questions as we went along. But just to give you an example, I'll read the last one, which is after visiting all the clinical sites, have you identified any distinct differences between them? And in what ways have you enhanced your medical skills during the rotation? It's not very direct questions. They really had to think about how they were going to approach the specific question and then reflect and then really give us a good quality response. So this is an example of the rubric where we looked at we assessed critical thinking, the reflection, and then of course we had to consider the grammatical aspects there as well. And as I mentioned, when we prompted the large language models, you really improve your accuracy if you ensure that the prompting and the rubric attributes of each specific section are really very detailed. And then in the last few years, we were now looking at giving constructive feedback, once again, more or less in the same manner, where we involved the facilitators, and we informed now the students once again why we were doing this, the importance for their specific profession, and once again prompted based on the rubric that was provided. And in this instance now we were looking at chats 3.5 and 4. And once we had worked with the LLMs, we then had the facilitators that had marked the student reflections as well as the large language models. We then sent a survey out to academics. We got quite not so many people responded, so many academics, only 26. And basically what we asked the academics is to look at the reflections that were marked by the facilitators and those that were marked by the large language models. And we asked if they could give us their opinion on which one they preferred. And so this is what we got, is that you can see that if you have a look here, because that will be on the next slide, but if we on here, what it's basically showing us is if we compare the marker, so the human facilitator, the chat 3.5 and 4, and this is just indicating that chat 4 actually gave results very similar to the human marker, while 3.5 was just slightly off. If you can see on the x-axis, those are the different scoring levels within the rubric. But chat 4 and the human facilitator gave more or less the same analysis, and 3.5 was slightly off. Now, in the survey to the academics, these are the results that we got from the 26 respondents. And what was very interesting is that 50% actually said that they would like that we use the LLMs, but we do maintain a level of human oversight. And then 26.9 chat 4, because you could actually see there was good prompting. It gave a step-by-step process in terms of the marking as well as in the constructive feedback. And there was a percentage, 15.4%, that said that they would like the human facilitators to look at the marking. That is also important to consider, is that there is a percentage of the academics who are really very skeptical about using large language models in order to mark the student reflections. And so basically what did we realize is that these LLMs are continuously developing, their prompting is always being improved. And so we have to establish an evaluation index to say, what level are we going to measure these LLMs at? What we definitely saw is Chat 4 yielded better results than 3.5, and important that we also take into consideration for academics that were skeptical about using large language models, and that we maintain a human oversight, even if we go the route of using the LLMs to provide the constructive feedback, because we do need to ensure that the feedback to the students is timely in an environment with people who have a lot on their plate. And so in terms of future prospects, where are we going? We all know there are new LLMs that are out in the market. There's Grok 3, there's DeepSeek. We are actually going to use that in a study going forward and see, can we generate better results than we did for Chat 4? And because especially with these new LLMs, they actually have embedded a chain of thought prompting, which what that basically means that there's a more detailed step-by-step process that the LLM tells you how it basically analyzes the student reflections that you would upload into it. Another thing that we need to consider is that at a later stage, these models might actually have cost implications, so we need to take that into consideration. But our biggest take-home message is that whether you go the route of the LLMs for the reasons that we've mentioned, it is really very important that you maintain that human-centered approach where the facilitators would then be able to provide an oversight after the reflections have been marked by the large language models. Also, to acknowledge the funding from the University of Pretoria Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Fund. And then thank you. That is my story.
Thank you so much, Yvette, for your story. I haven't even finished my sentence and the hands is going up. So
Excellent.
I'm going to ask James to ask your question.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. I have a question regarding the LMS and the double LM. How did you link the two? In other words, on the LMS you have the student reflections now.
Yes.
How did you get the LLM, the double LLM,
Yes.
to review the reflection of the student, and where did the feedback? Where was the feedback placed? Was it placed back on the LMS, or was it placed somewhere else and then you had to copy it? Or please explain that process.
Very, very, very good question. So with the Blackboard system, they uploaded their reflections there. So we had to actually download all the student reflections individually. And then once we had prompted the large language models, we were then able to upload simultaneously all the reflections, get the breakdown, and then re-enter those into the Blackboard system for each individual student. But even though we had to re-enter those for the students, because you actually save so much time by using the LLM to mark the reflections, it's still a worthy cause.
May I have a follow-up question, please?
100%.
Yes.
So once you got the feedback from the LLM,
Yes.
was it a total feedback that you could just give back to the LMS, or did you have to take each student and upload each student into the LMS?
We had to do that each student individually, because it's now two separate systems. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. It's a outstanding study, or outstanding process that you have followed. Very well done.
Thank you so much.
Liz, you can ask your question.
Thank you, Yvette. As always, it's fascinating to hear what you're doing. My question is about not how closely aligned or correlated the scores were, but the amount of feedback. Because I know from having marked medical student feedback in the past, reflections in the past, it's extremely tedious to mark a group of 350. It takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of personal it's influenced by your own personal view of what you hoped the experience would be, and then you're less favorable towards the students who don't have a positive experience after you've worked so hard to create a favorable experience. So it's a question of the quantity of the feedback as well. Was there a difference between the quantity of feedback between the open text part, between your human markers and your AI markers? Thank you.
That's also a good question. And the LLMs actually provided more detailed feedback. So I think because it's a structured system and it's basically responding to exactly how you've prompted it. So it really it takes everything into consideration and provides a step-by-step response. So which was great. So that was where we thought the LLMs provide that level of constructive, detailed, personal feedback, while we found that the human facilitators, which is, I guess, also the human error of the exhaustion of looking at every reflection, they were definitely shorter. And that is why we felt that it would be the best approach would be to use the LLMs to provide that detailed constructive feedback, and the human facilitator, because we know with the medical students, they're divided into groups when they do their clinical rotations, that the human facilitators can then maybe provide a more general feedback for every specific group, which will be different based on their different experiences. So yes, to answer your question, yes, the LLMs provided a longer, more detailed feedback than the human facilitators.
Thank you, Yvette. Lekanai?
Hi, that's me. It's Lekan, yeah. So again, I must congratulate you. That was amazing. I agree. I'm just excited to see this application happening. I noted that you had sought the view of the academics to compare the two. I don't know if I missed it, or if you think there's a value as part of the learning cycle to have the student themselves look at the LLM feedback compared to the marker and provide a reflection as part of mastery of the AI itself. Would there be a value in that? Is there something, that you're looking at?
Thank you for that excellent question as well. I think there will be value in it, because we would want to get the students' perspective. I think just at our stage of the study, we were really just more interested in the academics as our primary market. What do they think? Is this beneficial to them? But I think that would be the next step as well. It is important to get the students' perspective. Do they prefer the more detailed feedback? Are they happy with a more general response? Or just to get their input, I think it might actually also vary from the academics' opinion. We haven't looked at it yet, but it's definitely something that we are thinking going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yvette. Is there any other questions? Yes, you can go ahead.
Right? Hola, Mirishu.
Okay, I don't think that's a question. Liz, do you have a question?
No, I don't. Just a bit of feedback for the group.
Okay.
Yvette mentioned that it would be useful going forward. So we've got a joint project between Dr. Hlophe and Prof. Patrick and Marie and myself, where we're going to be testing this in the fully online postgraduate diploma in public health. And then there we intend to ask the students, we're going to blind their feedback and ask them which ones they prefer between the human marker and the AI marker, and why. So yes, it is being integrated. It will be tested soon. We hope to have some feedback this year. And I think Marie and Yvette, and I don't know if Sean is still on the call, we were aiming for one of the online conferences. Was it? Sorry, I got some other thing going on in the background. There's some, we were aiming for one of the online conferences to present our preliminary findings, if I'm correct. Thanks.
Yes.
Which one was it, Marie?
I think it was October photos.
Yeah.
If we have earlier ones, it might be at Flexible Futures.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, any other remarks, comments, questions? Yes, you can go ahead.
Hi, it's Mojaji. Maybe I
Yes,
used
Mojaji.
yeah, my daughter's what do you call it? Yeah, this platform. Mine is a comment. Thank you, Doctor and Prof. Though I am from a different environment, but I have learned a lot from this into a discussion. In my case, it's a primary school, a rural primary school in a rural environment. So I would appreciate if there can be some kind of a project also on this smart learning environment. And that will be helpful to both learners and my colleagues, because yes, we do have programs that can be implemented, but it poses a challenge where when coming to things such as activities, Prof said something about multiple intelligence and so on. It poses a problem because not much is done in practice to our foundation phase learners, and even us as educators, we sometimes struggle to try and create those environment, and more especially if maybe opportunities like this one are not always available to us, or maybe we are not aware of their availability. It really makes us shy away from change. So, and even though this change is can be very much helpful to us. So what I have learned now is that, yes, it is possible to create such environment. Currently, I've been trying it on English for grade 3. I did realize it's so challenging to find activities that fits the assigned or the stipulated curriculum that I have to teach the kids, and also having to, what can I say, having to get the learners to be used to the new way of doing things. So yeah, it is a challenge, though it's something doable. And this smart learning environment project like this one can be very handy. They can really help. And on the reflection, though, your discussion is basically for seems to be, I'm sorry, for higher learning. But I tried to relate and compare it with what we are doing. I've seen that we do have that part of reflection where learners are able to maybe create drawings and do narratives on the stories or the text read to them. And also they can be able to present to their colleagues, their peers, telling them how they feel. Do they like the story? What did they like about the story? Was it scary or whatever? So I can see, no, that is the reflection that the doctor was talking about. So far, yeah, I think I'm learning a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Majaji. And if you just look in the chat, Prof Liz has put the contact detail of Prof Sean in, so you are welcome to contact them. And maybe there's a project that can flow from this in the primary school area as well. So you will see the information there. Yeah, and Thank you, everybody, for attending. We are running out of time. We are in the last few minutes of the session. And I just want to remind all of you to, if you want to attend any of the future sessions that we have, you are welcome to follow us on LinkedIn. We can find us there as Visionary Circle. Rumanda has also posted all the links and the information in the chat. And we will have our next session on the 4th of September. We don't know yet who is going to speak at that day, but we will communicate it. We will first remind you to save the date, and then we will announce the speakers. And then we are really looking forward to see you on the 4th of September for the 3rd Visionary Circle of the year. And thank you very much for each one of you. Take the time to come and attend this. And goodbye from us.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
It's a pleasure. Bye. Bye.
Thank colleagues.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.